Oliver Stone's Vietnam War drama Platoon has been heralded as one of the greatest war films ever made. But how does the movie's complexity, honesty, and sometimes brutality make it one of the greatest history movies ever made? Let's find out on this episode of Real History.
Dipped in shit. New me. You dude's gonna love the knob for fucking ever.
Walking off the transport plane into Vietnam for the first time seems to be a very powerful memory for every non-veteran I've spoken to over the years. The heat just hits you in the face, just like the odor of the rotten jungle decay that is all around you. And right from the get-go, we are given this very disturbing representation of what we could call the revolving door. We see grizzled veterans with hollow faces boarding the plane while the boyish rookies are being brought in to replace them. So it's very eerie from the outset. As we look at these scenes, it's also worth mentioning that this movie was shot in the Philippines, which is positioned roughly at the same latitude as Vietnam, and certainly the conditions and the environment were just as unforgiving. And in fact, as a little bit of side trivia, the movie was shot right in the immediate aftermath of dictator Ferdinand Marcos being deposed. And so there was a little bit of volatility within the country simultaneous with this production. Finally, on a personal note, I'd like to tell you that I've had the opportunity at the Gettysburg Film Festival to talk in depth with the legendary Dale Dye, this film's military technical advisor who also plays the company captain. And some of the stories that I'm about to tell you, I heard directly from him and have also heard him or read about him in other interviews that he's conducted. And one of those first stories I'd like to tell you about is that he is actually the one being carried in the body bag, being placed on the cart here. He was on set that day. He apparently thought that the mannequins that were in the bags didn't look realistic enough, and so he hopped into one of the body bags, and that is what they filmed. That is what we see right here. The 25th Infantry Division, also known as the Electric Strawberry because of its distinctive unit patch that's actually a taro leaf, had a long and grueling history in Vietnam. Some of its first elements arrived as early as 1962 in a volunteer capacity, and we see continual troop escalations until 1969. And one brigade of the division, during the time stated in this film, actually partook in the year-long Operation Pershing in the Binh Dinh province of Vietnam. And it was certainly no walk in the park. And so the question now is, how do you prepare actors to recreate such grueling conditions as these? And ultimately, Dale Dye put the guys into a 14-day boot camp. And the scene where we see the platoon scaling the hillside was actually shot immediately at the end of boot camp. And actors like Willem Dafoe and Tom Berenger, I think, really took their roles as sergeants in a very serious manner, so much so that they were actually checking the feet and the socks of their subordinate actors because the real life conditions actually warranted it.
Just a little. Don't drink too much. Look, I don't want you drinking anymore, all right?
You don't need half that shit. I'll haul it for you. But next time you check with me first, all right?
Okay.
I think this is the universal plight for any grunt who is heading out on his first patrol. You're taught how to use all of this different equipment in basic training, and there's a natural inclination to take it all with you the first time you venture out. But while I'm thinking about the weight of war, whether it be physical or psychological, a book that you absolutely have to check out is written by veteran Tim O'Brien, and that is entitled The Things They Carried. And if you weren't in the Vietnam War yourself, you really have to read that book because it will give you a whole new personal perspective on what the conflict meant for those who were actually fighting it.
Guy's in 3 years, he thinks he's Jesus fucking Christ or something.
O'Neill, your short-timer stay in, but you go out. I need veterans out there.
I think in front of the men, it's necessary for me to give the orders.
Yes, sir.
In some regards, being a rookie lieutenant was one of the most unenviable jobs in the Vietnam War, in my view, especially if you were a replacement officer. You really had to go out of your way to gain the trust of enlisted men. And if there was a perception that you were unnecessarily putting them in danger, there was a remote possibility that you might be fragged while using the latrine. And friction between officers and enlisted men sometimes further intensified due to the fact that oftentimes combat infantry officers were rotated off the line every 6 months, and meanwhile their enlisted men had to do a year of service. So there was that disparity as well.
They come from the end of the line, most of them. Small towns you never heard of. Pulaski, Tennessee, Brandon, Mississippi, Pork Bend, Utah, Wampum, Pennsylvania. 2 years high school is about it. Maybe if they're lucky, a job waiting for them back in a factory. But most of them got nothing. They're poor, they're the unwanted. Yet they're fighting for our society and our freedom.
Even during World War II, a high proportion of college graduates entered military service, but that had drastically changed by the time we get to the 1960s. Some 2.5 million Americans served in the military during the Vietnam War years, but that only accounts for about 10% of American males who reached draft age as that conflict was ongoing. And of those who served, 80% were classified as working class or impoverished. And interestingly enough, it was often those same working poor families who were opposed to the anti-war movement. And all the while, wealthier college students and their families were often in support of it.
Oh, you look educated.
I volunteered for it.
You did what?
I volunteered. I dropped out of college and told them I wanted the infantry.
You volunteered for this shit, man?
You believe that?
You was a crazy fucker. Giving up college?
Didn't make much sense. I wasn't learning anything.
I really like this dialogue because it shows that not all stereotypes are universal. The character of Chris is a college boy with a conscience who doesn't want to shirk what he believes is his rightful sense of duty. And frankly, director Oliver Stone knew this firsthand because that's exactly what he had done as a college student. He enlisted.
I tell you what, you be cool. I introduce you around to some of the heads.
What are the heads?
Later, man.
These are the everyday, mundane tasks that most war movies had never showed up until this point. And it reminds me of an excerpt from a veteran's memoir. And that veteran was Stephen Atkins, who wrote in his book, "Almost as strange as the scenery was the ever-present smell of human waste disposal. The heat and humidity of South Vietnam made an ideal laboratory for bacteria and fungus. Disposal of human waste was imperative to prevent sickness, and the Army was to burn it. Burning shit produced a smell that seemed to permeate the atmosphere. It was everywhere. Open latrines were another familiar sight. Modesty was not possible, so nobody bothered with it. Within a few days, American soldiers were as casual towards bodily functions as the Vietnamese. And that is a really good snapshot of this basic component of everyday life on the front.
Feel good?
Yeah, it feels good. I got no pain in my neck now.
Feeling good's good enough. Put your mouth on this.
Some units did in fact smoke dope in the bush, but most who made use of that would only do so while they were stationed in the rear. It would be too dangerous in many cases to do it on the front line. But as we see here, turning a rifle into a bong, that was a real thing. And in fact, some TV news crews who were covering the war in Vietnam actually filmed GIs doing just that. So there is documentary evidence of this sort of thing occurring.
We don't smoke marijuana.
Man, where the hell is everybody, man? They're getting high, that's what. Bunch of hopheads, they think there's something special, man. Listen to that. That's a bad jam.
Redneck noise, dude. That's all it is. Make about as much sense as you do. All them chucks be rapping about how they losing their hope.
While military service often had the capacity to instill racial empathy and break down barriers, it also opened up the door from time to time to outright hostility. And it wasn't uncommon for Southern troops to fly the Confederate flag from their barracks, put it above their bunk, wave it atop their armored personnel carrier, and so on and so forth. And keep in mind that this war is overlapping with the civil rights movement, and naturally African American troops don't take too kindly to that sort of imagery in their midst. And as an interesting side point, Martin Luther King Jr. was actually outraged when he learned that African Americans suffered a higher percentage of combat casualties than their white counterparts, and that suggested that minority troops were purposely placed in harm's way, or that there wasn't a lot of thought and consideration placed into it. In other cases, though, compromises were struck. For instance, white troops on a fire base might listen to Hank Williams in the morning, and black troops might listen to James Brown in the afternoon. So there was capacity for compromise. Go along to get along, as the saying goes.
Oh, no.
And while we're on the topic of music, I really like this singing scene in the bunker. It's a moment that underscores their belief that these are both the best and worst of times. You're in a constantly crappy situation, but also you're surrounded by some of the best and closest people that you might ever know in your entire life. And I think you could also say that as a mellow alternative to drugs or alcohol, music was most definitely a coping mechanism for these guys.
Bravo 6, Bravo 6, Bravo 2. Be advised there is a bunker complex up front.
See you next week.
You'd probably pick a guy even smaller than Willem Dafoe to be the likes of a tunnel rat, but man, these guys had real guts, often with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other, as they're attempting to root out the enemy. In more cautious circumstances, though, tunnel rats would naturally drop explosives into enemy tunnels, but they would also flush them out with the likes of smoke and tear gas if the opportunity presented itself.
Holy shit, you see that fucking head come apart, man?
The actors in these scenes were actually Vietnamese refugees that were brought to the Philippines specifically for these shots. And as you can very well imagine, these scenes in particular were quite emotionally draining to bring to the screen. And I think it's worthwhile to point out that while cold-blooded murders certainly weren't widespread in every infantry unit fighting in Vietnam, both Oliver Stone and Dale Dye said that they saw these things happen. And you have to keep in mind that this movie is a semi-autobiographical interpretation of what they personally experienced. And I give them a lot of credit for their willingness to explore that brutality that is brought out in people. Because as Dye said in one interview of Bunny's character, it's what war can do to you. Anybody can be pushed to the edge of cruelty. And that is exactly what we see playing out in this scene.
Nó không mà cái ông đến đây giết heo giết gà phải không?
Trời ơi!
You tell him. He starts talking, or I'm gonna waste more of them.
And this is what can happen when you have a junior officer who can't exert leadership from the outset. He's here standing powerless at the feet of more experienced non-coms. And I've read about things like this happening time and again. The lack of a functional chain of command has the potential to lead to lawlessness. And that is exactly what we see playing out here. In addition to pointing out a very young Johnny Depp here, who is shown prominently in these scenes, it's also worthwhile to mention that Dale Dye actually had this scene changed from what Oliver Stone originally had envisioned. The movie was supposed to portray the villagers being slaughtered, but Dale Dye essentially said, you know, we probably wouldn't have done that, and he was able to convince Oliver Stone to temper the scene a little bit. But you know, it's that same sort of mindset, the same reason why the character of Chris saves the young girl who is almost raped by some of his comrades. And I think that there's an interesting balance that is playing out here, because the filmmakers wanted to show the inhumanity of war while not suggesting that everybody had completely lost their humanity. And I think that is an important distinction to draw.
Staff Sergeant Barnes?
Sir!
I want a full report from you on this when we get back to the CP.
You got it, Dye, and I can throw in plenty of eyewitnesses.
And I can promise you something. If I find out there was an illegal killing, there will be a court-martial. Right now, I need every man in the field, and you two will cease fire.
As it turns out, just 3 years after this movie, Dale Dye was in another Vietnam War film directed by Brian De Palma entitled Casualties of War. And in that film, Dye's character is far less sympathetic to a soldier who wants to report the rape and murder of a young Vietnamese girl, a murder that was carried out by some of his comrades. And in that movie, Dye's character is more eager to sweep the matter under the rug and just move on, a pattern that I fear was somewhat pervasive in instances as such.
Red leg! Red leg! Ripper Bravo 2! Check your fire! Check your fire!
I can think of few movies that better demonstrate small squad tactics by showing fire missions, flanking, maneuvering, etc., etc. But this dolly shot of the squad running to meet the enemy was actually made possible by all the actors and all of the grips going into the brush with machetes to clear all the vegetation because filming time was running really short. And I think that really speaks to the sense of camaraderie that was instilled among the actors and the crew as the production was ongoing.
They got a lion! What?
Oh, and this scene, of course, is the iconic shot of the movie. It's on the DVD cover, it's on posters, it's synonymous with this film where Sergeant Elias is being sacrificed. And him raising his hands up in the air, skyward, is supposed to be symbolic of the crucifixion and of him being forsaken. Oddly enough, as an added bonus in that regard, Willem Dafoe portrays exactly that in 1988 in Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ. So oddly enough, he gets to relive this moment in a very different context. But we see this in a lot of war films. And spoiler alert for also a movie that came out in 1989, and that is the Civil War movie Glory. We see similar imagery in that movie incorporated into the death scene of Matthew Broderick's character, Colonel Shaw, as he is charging the ramparts of Fort Wagner, where likewise his arms go up in the air, almost as if he is on a crucifix. And so I think those are interesting to think about because there are some religious overtones that are incorporated into war movies like these. But from a technical standpoint, if you look closely, you can actually see a wire jutting out of Elias's vest, and that is actually the wiring for his blood squibs, which in reality didn't go off when they are supposed to. So still a very, very impactful, powerful scene though. Man, this is one of the most intense combat scenes ever brought to the screen. And as veterans of wars have told me, you'll never have a higher high in your life than being in the thick of combat. And Chris's, I guess you could say, paradoxical sensation of excitement here, there's actually nothing irregular about that when your adrenaline is pumping at 1,000%. But as we take a closer look at some of the other elements in this scene, this is just so well done. The costumes for the NVA soldiers are particularly quite well done. And if you look at some of the finer details, they even have vines tied around their legs, bits of vine, which was done in real life during the Vietnam War. So if they were killed or wounded, their bodies could be pulled away easier by their comrades. It's these really little technical details that Stone and Dye are able to bring to this film that really make it stand out from a material culture standpoint. And also, in the background noise, we can hear a woof, woof, woof sound. It sounds almost like an ominous drum beat. And the first time I saw this movie, I thought that's what it was. I thought maybe someone's banging a drum for psychological effect. But in actuality, that is the sound of an 81 millimeter flare canister that is falling to the ground. And that's what's giving off this really disorienting, haunting, ambient light that is hovering above the jungle. And man, it works just so well for these scenes to create this sort of nightmarish scenario.
All right, get me Bravo, right away.
Charlie, come report hand-to-hand and perimeter store. 3 holes are down, they need help.
Okay, get 2 squads from Alpha down there right away. Go, go. Eagle 6.
Director Oliver Stone gives himself a cameo here as the battalion commander who meets his tragic end. But in real life, Stone's record is really something. He received the Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a number of other medals and commendations. And one could say that the record of Dale Dye is even more impressive, who is likewise a Purple Heart recipient. And I think that these two veterans set out to make an authentic war film when most of the United States wanted to forget the war, put it behind them, and move on. And ultimately, this duo, these filmmakers, this production team, the actors who were so committed to their roles, they ultimately succeeded in making a film that condemned the war, but it didn't villainize all of the warriors who were in it. And I think that that's something very poignant to think about as we reflect upon the making and legacies of Platoon. I don't think a civilian director could have pulled it off.
I think now, looking back, we did not fight the enemy. We fought ourselves. And the enemy was in us.
Oh, it's an ending that gets me every time. And in the end, it's about conveying the message that we can't throw lives away heedlessly. I know that was certainly the mentality of Stone and Dye as they were involved in the making of this film. And these guys had the courage to begin a conversation acknowledging that the war happened, it was lost. Now, what are we going to learn from it? And in that regard, Platoon is as much a question as it is an answer. And on that point, I think that's what distinguishes it as a very notable piece of not only historic, but cinematic art. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Real History. I know that this is not an easy movie to watch, but it is certainly one that is worthy of a profound conversation, and I hope that some of my perspectives have enriched this story that I know many of you are intimately familiar with. Before you head out, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and also feel free to leave a comment below telling us your thoughts on the movie Platoon and other films that depict the Vietnam War. Also be sure to check out our t-shirt store as well as our website, which features all sorts of great educational resources. We really appreciate you tuning into this episode of Real History. We'll see you next time, and until then, stay curious, my friends.